the SnailTrail4x4 podcast. If you like going off-roading in Toyotas, wrenching on Toyotas, camping in Toyotas, and maybe even poking a little bit of fun at Toyotas, then this may or may not be the podcast for you. Welcome everybody to today's show. My name is Tyler, and joining me in the studio is Jimmy J. Did everybody get that?
I think so, but you totally missed what secret podcast intros thing.
If you like
that one.
Hydraulics in Toyotas?
There you go.
Yay! Oh, man. No, we got a fun episode. It is Monday, so some fun stuff coming to you guys' ear holes. Hopefully everybody had a fantastic weekend.
Yeah.
How was yours, sir?
Rainy.
Right? Oh, that's right. It was very rainy.
Yeah.
And
hopefully snowy.
Snowy at higher elevations, it should be. It was, is going to be, is something. So the toy drive at Uncle Tom's was happening this last weekend. And I decided not to go.
Oh, why?
Because it was supposed to be sleeting at Uncle Tom's.
Yuck.
And I've been there. I did the toy drive 1 year with sleet happening, and it was miserable.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Everybody that was there was packed into Uncle Tom's like sardines. It was cold, wet, and frozen almost outside. And so we ended up going to higher elevation, had a fun snow day out of it in the middle of the storm, and almost got caught in that storm.
Oh, yeah. That could be fun.
And so since the goal was to get out with the baby on Saturday, I was like, that sounds like a terrible decision to take a baby into. So I didn't go.
That's smart. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that there were some other toy drives that happened last weekend.
Yeah.
And I believe the Hella Trails toy drive is on the 21st or whatever the upcoming Saturday is. But it's all the way down in San Jose.
Oof.
Yeah. So
I can't go down there.
I don't know if I'm not allowed down there.
Yeah, I'm not allowed in the Bay Area anymore.
No. So well, I might have to miss that one. I might just give toys to like Chuck Norris or something and be like, here's some extra prizes for you. Take these down for them. Yeah. Or I think there's a bunch of local areas that just have toy drives. So maybe I'll just give them out. But our listeners have a chance to win some toys.
Yes, they do.
At least I know you're giving like little leftover Reed toys for your gift.
Which pretty much his toys are trash right now anyway. So someone's getting an empty water bottle.
Nice.
A Amazon Fire Stick remote that doesn't work anymore.
Perfect.
May have baby drool on it.
And a remote to a siren that doesn't work anymore.
A remote to a siren that doesn't work anymore. And an empty box.
Ooh, that's a favorite. You're giving that away?
We are.
Wow.
He got a walker, so he doesn't need to use the empty box anymore.
Got it.
So.
Yeah. Once Christmas hits, his favorite present will be the wrapping paper.
Pretty much, yeah. And then once he's done with it, the listeners can get the wrapping paper too.
Perfect. Yeah. She won't care about anything inside the gift. He wants the wrapping paper.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I'm giving away pre-cut 2x4s. And I actually think I might have some leftover like 4x16 and maybe some old tile from a vanity.
Ooh.
Will be going in my gift to a lucky winner.
I think my gift is way better.
Maybe. Yeah. Baby Drool, I think, won it right there. No. We're giving away to some lucky winners some gifts from Tyler and I from Christmas. For our Christmas gifts to you guys. We're going to figure out, we don't know what each other's giving.
No.
I just know that I'm going to destroy you once again.
No.
I am going to kick your butt and become a 2-time winner. Champion. The ultimate gift giver of the SnailTrail4x4 podcast. And it's going to be awarded to Jack Stan Jimmy.
I'll say Will's going to win one again. Or is he going to make another winning?
Oh, no. I don't know who it's going to, but I know that I'm going to win between you and I. And so if you guys want to win a gift from us, we got some good things working that we're trying to figure out and get to you guys. I know that I've got one thing already in the queue, trying to think if I can figure out another thing that's going to work out well. But go over to iRate 4x4, sign up under the SnailTrail4x4 podcast. There's that's under the watch, listen, and discuss section. And sign up for that giveaway tier for a chance to win a gift from Tyler and myself for the month of December.
Very cool. Yep. It's going to be fun.
I need to get on my parts and make sure that they can happen.
It's coming up quick.
It is coming up quick.
So are we giving away gifts at roughly the same time that we're going to be giving each other gifts?
I would assume.
Or do you want to give each other gifts closer to the Christmas?
It doesn't matter to me. I have your gifts already, so
Okay. I need to still get something else for you.
Okay.
Got one.
Okay.
Need one more thing.
Cool. Yeah. I actually
I
made a wreath of dick flakes for you.
Oh, favorite. Can't wait to put that up near the mini assistant.
Oh, Dad, what are these?
Yeah.
They're rocket ships.
Yeah.
We support NASA around here.
There you go. Perfect. I love it. Yeah. What else we got going on?
Let's see. We got a giveaway for some tires, which is the one that I'm getting really excited about. I can't wait for somebody to finally win these tires. We've been teasing and taunting people with them for, a year and a half now?
Yeah, quite a while.
So, yeah, it's a full set. 4 tires of your choosing from Yokohama. Pretty much anything that they have that is under a 20-inch rim and DOT approved compounds.
Wow. Yep.
So if you want trailer tires for your trailer, you can do it. If you want some tires for your truck, for your tow vehicle, you can do it. If you want some off-road tires for your rock crawler, you can do it.
Yes.
So there's a lot of really cool stuff, a lot of great options they have. They're a big brand in tires, just not really in the off-road market as much.
You're right. That's kind of interesting.
They're huge in performance tires.
Yeah. And drifting.
Yeah. So that kind of tire, that stuff, they're massive in, but they just haven't really made a huge break into the off-road scene. Yeah. I think it's just Nitto and BFG and Toyo all have kind of the big grip on the rock crawling off-road market.
Maybe.
But we both love the Yokohama tires that we have. Mm-hmm. We run the Geolander MTs, and Jimmy runs the Geolander ATs.
Yeah, on my Tacoma.
The Tacoma. Mm-hmm. I had them on the F-150, and I loved that tire. So they do a great job with tires. They don't do a great job with marketing and branding in the off-road industry.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. And I can almost guarantee you, if you want a set of 40-inch MTs from Yokohama, if you're the winner and you get a 40-inch set of the MTs and you have them shipped to the warehouse, you're going to get a used set of 40-inch MTs. Probably. And the 40s will either go on Samantha or on Kermit.
Most likely, yeah.
So you're probably going to have to talk to them and get them shipped to your house.
Fair. So anyways, to get entered to win some Yokohama tires, all you have to do is go to, Apple Podcasts. Make an account if you don't have one already. If you do already have an account, then make an account on your friend's phone and leave a review for the podcast on Apple Podcasts. It can be anything you want. We don't really care what it is. If you're just like there for a chance to win tires, put that. And the more reviews we get, the more chances we have to make it into your buddy's ear holes and your family's ear holes and your friends' ear holes. So everybody's ear holes out there. So we're bribing you with a chance to win some tires to leave reviews.
Yeah, absolutely. So. And once we get to 750, then Tyler and I get to look at the calendar and figure out what do we want to do next.
Yeah, exactly.
Who wants more tires maybe? Or what else out there is there that we might be able to bribe you guys with?
Yep.
And who knows? Maybe we'll do something smaller and it'll be 800, or maybe we'll do something big and be 1,000.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I don't know. We did just get off the phone with Brian from Four Wheel Underground.
We did.
And he mentioned something about doing a hot, spicy weekend getaway with him.
Whoa.
At 800.
I am in.
Well, you have to leave a review, though, for a chance to win that one.
I'm going to leave all the next, 1,000. Though I think he did say in the last time that we recorded there was no cuddling.
What?
Didn't he?
I don't know. Did he?
I think he said between him and I.
He didn't mean it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's just between you two.
Maybe.
He left it open for the listeners, so I don't know.
The newlywed Brian is available.
Oh, man. Anyways, that's the review the giveaways for reviews over there at Apple Podcasts. That's all you got to do is just leave a review and you're automatically entered to win a bunch of stuff. And as we come out with new stuff for you to win, your reviews that you've already landed and put down count towards everything that we come up with from then on out. So it's the gift that keeps on giving. Just go do it. Let's see, what else do we got? We did the Christmas gift stuff.
Yeah, I think we're about finished with our normal intro.
Perfect. Then let's get right on over to today's campfire discussion, shall we?
Let's do it. I am excited to talk to this individual because I think he's going to solve my problem.
Hoping he solves a lot of people's problems.
Yes.
He's like Vanilla Ice.
Yeah. Ice, baby.
Yeah. If you got a problem, you'll all solve it.
Oh.
Yeah.
I wonder if we can get him to rap.
Next call.
All right.
Next call. We'll call him and ask him to sing Vanilla Ice for us. All right. Well, we got Eric on the line here from Radial Dynamics, a really cool up and coming power steering company that is doing some amazing, really cool things with power steering systems.
Absolutely. Breaking the industry, changing the way we think about it, and doing a fantastic job at customer service along the way.
Yeah, he is. So we'll take a quick break and we'll be right on back with Eric from Radial Dynamics.
If you have a third-gen 4Runner and want 16 inches of wheel travel without cutting into your sheet metal, check out 4-Wheel Underground's brand new cantilever suspension, featuring an integrated anti-sway bar and turn-by-dial disconnect. Don't sacrifice performance and comfort for the sake of wheel travel. Get both with our new cantilever system at 4wheelunderground.com.
Oh, welcome back, everybody. This is today's campfire discussion. We have a fun interview, another good one. We love getting to sit down with industry experts and talking about topics that Jimmy and I probably shouldn't be talking about on our own.
That would be wise. Yes.
I think today is going to be one of those. Today we have in the house, live online, all the way from Massachusetts, is Eric from Radial Dynamics. How you doing, man?
Good. How are you guys?
We're doing pretty good
Doing
this
well.
morning. Yeah. So you have a pretty awesome company. You have a really good name. I don't know if you're very familiar how much work you actually do in the off-road industry, but there's a lot of people that speak very highly of Radial Dynamics, from the Ultra 4 racers, Vora racers, off-roaders in general. Everybody says that a couple things that kind of end up being resounding whenever you hear about Radial Dynamics. One is you can just call and talk to somebody about power steering systems and get some really good conversations, really good answers, help with diagnostic stuff with power steering systems. And the other one is that the product is just really high quality. You never really have to worry about it, kind of thing. So that's obviously a great combo. And we wanted to bring you on the podcast today to talk about this combo, this what you built with Radial Dynamics and how it all came to fruition. So I guess in short, we have a couple things we want to be able to talk with you about. But first, what is the basics of a power steering system? Why get into this business of doing power steering system stuff? Is it simple to do? Is it really interesting to do? What is about power steering that's so alluring?
Well, what really was alluring to me is that to me, it was very simple. My background was in fluid systems professionally before I got into steering. Been off-road racing for a long time. Since 2010 was when I got into it, but I'd been off-roading since I was in high school back in 2003. And, I went to school for mechanical engineering over at UMass, which is, campus is a half hour from where I'm at now. My first job out of college, I worked for a company that manufactured spray nozzles for industrial applications. So not the kind of stuff that you see at Home Depot or, at the local hardware store. We were doing nozzles for air pollution control, for power plants, for oil refineries, things of that nature. And so I kind of got into fluids and started becoming an expert in spray nozzles of all things. Talk about finding a niche.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
But, I was into off-roading on the weekends. I was going out, pretty much every weekend, had a bunch of Toyotas and got into racing back in the early days of Ultra 4. Never actually got to compete at Hammers myself. Never really had the budget or the vehicle for it, but did some, more low budget East Coast racing. We ran a couple series down in Pennsylvania and up here around the Northeast. And so I was in the Ultra 4 community and rock crawlers and all that stuff, when all of a sudden in 2017, I was out with Big B Motorsports and they were trying to figure out why they were smoking trophy truck steering pumps every single race. And it was one of those things where, it jumped out at me that the fundamentals of what's going on in a steering system were really being overlooked by what was supposed to be the best of the best out there. And when I realized that it was that fundamental of an issue, that to me, there's no question, like, this shouldn't have even gotten this far, that people are trying to figure out why they're having problems. That was the eye-opening moment. There's definitely a light bulb went off in my head, and I can pinpoint the exact minute that happened. And it kind of, that was a pivotal moment in my pivotal.
Say that 10 times fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Anyway, my life changed.
There you go.
So is that pivotal thing, is it just flow restriction? I mean, talking about your background in nozzles and then all of a sudden having pumps blowing up, is it?
Yeah. I mean, at that point in the nozzle company, I was given the task of kind of creating a new division doing integrated pump systems. So we were, there were a lot of parallels where in my day job, we would get customers saying, okay, I'm getting this nozzle from you. Can you supply me with a pump and the valves and controls and piping and everything to go with it? And we always just used to say, no, you give it this flow rate, this pressure, and this is what this nozzle will do. Mm-hmm. And it was, at the time I said, well, we got a lot of smart people in this building. It was a company of 200 employees, and it was a very engineering focused. We weren't going after the mass market, mass produced nozzles. It was, we were kind of looking for the customers that needed an engineered solution.
Okay.
And so, I said, there's no reason that we can't do pump systems. So I ended up kind of taking the lead on that, and in a lot of ways had to teach myself about how to, read pump curves and calculate flow velocities and do all that stuff and actually figure out what makes a good system. So all of that really just translated over, and my background wasn't in hydraulics specifically, but it was looking at the same thing, calculating flow rate and pressure is going to tell you how much pump horsepower you need. And, flow rate divided by the inside diameter of the hose will tell you how much velocity you have. And you can look up in any hydraulic handbook that there's, specific velocities that you're trying to target in different parts of the system. And so it was really just kind of pulling all those pieces together.
Nice. So there's in kind of going over all that, there's a couple of really key things I think we want to hit on. So we're going to start with the most important one, your Toyotas. So I don't know if you know much about Jimmy and I. We love our Toyotas. SnailTrail is the dual cases, low gearing, go slow as you can on the trail, right?
That's where it all started.
Yep. What Toyotas, plural, you said, did you have in the past?
My very first truck that I got in high school was a 98 Toyota Tacoma.
Okay. Extended
cab, 3.4 liter. And I had that one for pretty much senior year of high school and all the way through college, but ended up doing a Dana 44 under the front end, bob the bed, half doors, the whole 9 yards. And I loved that truck. That thing was so good.
Nice.
Unfortunately, the frame rotted out, and this was in
East Coast problems.
Oh, seriously. This was 2006 and 2006, 2007. So it was right around when Toyota started having all of the frame issues. And nowadays they'll just, you bring your truck in and they just give you a new frame and call it a day. But back then it was, you bring your truck in, if the frame's rusted out, they give you 1.5 times excellent condition Blue Book value, regardless of what condition it's in.
Wow. Huh.
So I took them up on that. After stripping everything off of the truck that I could, anything that I could get my hands on.
Does it just have to be a rolling chassis at that point? Kind of like insurance companies when you're.
That's kind of how I brought it at first to the dealership. They said, no, you can't. You got to put it back together. So
that's funny.
I did keep the bed. I kept everything out of the front axle. It was just a bare, empty front axle housing. I just tried to just barely get it to a point where I could roll it down the road and roll it into the dealership. And they said, congratulations, you hit the jackpot. Here's here's a car that you can borrow for a month while we process your paperwork. And then here's your check. And and
Dang.
on your way.
Did you get the rental insurance on that car that you borrowed for a
No.
month? Oh,
It was all included.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what came after that 98?
So then I bought a 93 Toyota truck. So I built essentially the exact same truck, except the front diff was on the opposite side, on the passenger side instead of drivers. But I put the Tacoma bed on that truck. I ended up dovetailing it. I did exo cage and essentially built exactly what I had. At that point, a good friend of mine had a 85 Toyota that was already on tons, dual cases, propane, that he was putting up for sale. And so I said, well, I'll just get that and I'll sell the one that I just built. So I sold the 93. Some guy came up from New Jersey, was shipping it down to Brazil. He was going to go do some rainforest challenge and then sell it down there and fly home. So, it worked out for everybody. Who knows where that truck is today, if it still is.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then I had my 85 Toyota. That was the last one that I had. And, that ended up becoming a full truggy and got into some Ultra 4 style racing with it. It was never fast at all whatsoever.
22R, I assume, not the RE.
22R, propane, dual cases. I basically had to race in single low because I didn't have enough power to turn 37s in high range. So, it topped out at like 40, 45 miles an hour, but, I had a blast.
Yeah, there you go.
That sounds fun. Why? So you said that was the last one. What happened from then?
That was the last wheeler. I started at one point, I tore it down. I was going to build an all new chassis for it. Got that to the point of being a roller. And that was 2015. And then Bro Lights started becoming a thing. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Bro Lights.
No.
So it was a spec Ford Ranger short course class that kind of originated down in Pennsylvania. Eric Miller and a bunch of the East Coast Ultra 4 guys at the time, everybody was bench racing, saying, well, if I had Eric's truck, I could go as fast as him. And so they said, all right, let's create a spec series. So basically the rules were you had to start with a 2-wheel drive, 4-cylinder, 5-speed Ford Ranger with TTB front end. So it had to be like an 83 to 97. And you had to give it a cage, fuel cell, safe, racing seat, 5-point harnesses. But other than that, you couldn't touch the engine, couldn't touch the transmission. You could re-gear. You could have up to a 2-inch shock. Basically, for $3,000 to $5,000, you could build a competitive truck, and everybody had essentially the same truck.
Okay.
Yeah.
It grew very quickly. And I think, I jumped in on the bandwagon. I built a truck. All of our buddies built trucks. And at one point, I think we had 20 to 25 trucks on a course at once, just banging doors, hitting jumps. It was wild. And then the whole thing kind of fell apart just as quick as it picked up. So I think it lasted like 2 years, and then it tanked. And mine is still, mine was rotting out behind my garage for 5 years. I actually had bushes growing up through it. And last year we had to do some pump development that our in-house dyno didn't have enough horsepower to do. So I dug it out of the weeds and it's in my garage, right on the other side of this wall, that we use it now as a 100 horsepower test stand for steering pumps.
Yeah.
But,
so did anybody actually beat Eric Miller?
if he broke, he's a hell of a driver. He's really fast.
Yeah.
There's quite a few fast guys out here on the East Coast, and I was just lucky if I could keep up.
It's always a fun challenge, though. You're pushing them because they don't. I'm sure they have an ego to uphold to some extent, and some pride to be there. And then as us normal people, in a way, we're always just trying to catch up, and it's always a good race.
Yeah.
Fun.
So I ended up building the Bro Light truck, and then also around the same time there was a buggy that came up for sale on Craigslist a couple hours away, and it was when I saw it, I just had to have it. It was a 2-wheel drive kind of. I don't want to say sandrail, but kind of a dune buggy sort of thing. Hayabusa motor in it, chain drive, like long travel, doesn't belong in New England one bit. But I jumped on that and I've had that ever since. So I've got the two vehicles that I still own today. And that buggy, I ended up racing Mint 400 with it back in 2017. caught it on fire, blew up the motor, had a great time dragging a paperweight back across the country.
Oh,
But
man.
I was going to ask that about the Hayabusa motor. I know those things are badass little motors, but putting them into the Mint 400, having them scream at what, 7,000 RPMs for how many hours?
10,000 RPM.
10,000
RPMs. Oh shit.
Yeah, and it's funny. It was a car that was built. It was obviously built out in California. From what I heard from the guy that I bought it from up in Maine, what I had heard was that it was built in California. Some guy in Michigan bought it and was bringing it out to the dunes out there. And then this guy in Maine had bought it from Michigan. And it doesn't belong on the East Coast whatsoever. It's, there's really nothing else that's like it in this area. And, so I was like, well, I'll bring it out to Vegas. I'll do the Mint 400 with it. And I'm looking at what class can I fit in. I didn't fit into any class. The motor is 1.3 liter, so it's too big to be considered a UTV. It's not a car engine, so it can't fit into any of the car classes. I ended up entering, because this was really just a bucket list item for me. I wanted to say
motorcycle
that I'd
class?
done it. Yeah. Well, I ended up doing unlimited sportsman was my class. So basically I was in a class with spec trophy trucks. It was all the trophy truck drivers that were pre-running for the unlimited race. They would enter their spec truck in this class. And so, I'm in this little 1,500 pound Hayabusa powered car on 30-inch tires, which that was just, God. I would not recommend racing the Mint on 30-inch tires. That was just absolutely brutal. But got trophy truck starting right behind me. And it's like, all right, please just don't run over me. And
Don't even tap me from behind. It might break the
drive right through you.
I had a friend. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say we made it 86 miles, and then the motor came apart. Kind of an assembly failure on my part from when I had put it back together, and broke the whole corner of the motor off. Dumped all the oil onto the headers. Caught on fire.
Oh man,
that was a fun day.
Wow. Yeah, wild. I did a replay. I have a 91 Toyota pickup, and it's 22 RE, and I did a head gasket many years ago, and I had a buddy say, you should just drop a Hayabusa motor in there. It makes more horsepower than what you have now. And I was like, yeah, that would be really fun, but I don't know how I would get it on the streets out here in California. I couldn't drive it to work legally, but that thought came up.
So much fun to drive, but it's one of those things like, with the Hayabusa motor, and especially with this one, it had a chain-driven gearbox for my gear reduction and forward reverse. It's the type of car that you can only drive it at 100%. Like there's no just kind of cruising around, like, because it's loud, it's clunky, everything. If you drive it 100%, wide open throttle all the time, that's how it's meant to be driven.
Yeah. Yeah, probably not good for the traffic situations out here.
No.
That's fun.
After I spent a year rebuilding it after the Mint, tore it down to the frame, new engine, junkyard engine, but put it all back together, did a couple off-road races with it. And then I actually got into tarmac hill climb racing.
Oh.
And that's pretty much what I have been doing ever since. I haven't really done that much off-road racing myself since then. But at the time I realized that I could build twice as many 2-wheel drive race cars for the same price as one 4-wheel drive, and I break a lot less stuff. So, and then of course that was also around the time that Radial Dynamics, the whole concept started to take shape. And so I started a steering business because I figured this will be a great way to justify and pay for all the racing. And then I haven't even raced in 2 years at this point. Car's been going through the buggy's getting converted to EV now. So it's got a Tesla drivetrain that I'm swapping into it.
Nice.
But, the business has grown so much, and it's been so fulfilling just creating what we've created here. And I'm working with teams that are at way, way higher levels than anything I'd ever be able to accomplish on my own.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we jump into what's coming or what you're up to, I want to go even farther back. Just let's step it back. Like, did you grow up out there in Massachusetts area, and how did off-roading come about in your life? Was it always something that your family did, or is it just you got together with some high school friends and fell in love?
I'm the black sheep of my family. So yeah, I grew up out around Boston. I didn't come from a motorsports family. I'm the only one in my family that does any form of motorsports. And when I was in high school, of course, all my friends at the time, it actually started off with cars, and like Fast and the Furious was big. So all my friends were getting like Honda Civics,
Rice
and
rockets.
Rice. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The rice scene was getting big, but I was always interested in off-road, and so I, when I got my hands on a Tacoma and started researching lift kits and started teaching myself how to weld, because I couldn't afford to buy bumpers or sliders or any of that. Mm-hmm. And I look back at, the stuff that I built in those days when I was in high school and college, and it's ugly. It's not good. Bubblegum welds and just what I thought was acceptable. I mean, like every year, my quality standards just go up so far that to look back, it's kind of like, ew. But
yeah. I think we all do that, though.
Yeah, that's all the start now, right?
Yeah, on everything in a way. You got to start somewhere, right? And wherever you start is where you're at, and hopefully you're going to be improving as you go along. But if I go back and look at my first YouTube channel or first YouTube video, it's absolute garbage. And my standards are way higher to this day. And probably if you listen to our first podcast, that's probably really bad too.
I remember the first podcast. Yeah. They were pretty bad.
Yeah. So hopefully, hopefully you start. Everybody's got to start somewhere, and I think the goal is to improve from there.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So born and raised out in Massachusetts, black sheep of the family. Just got, all friends were getting into the rice rocket scene. You decided to raise your vehicle instead of lower it. Yeah, and then went to college for engineering and did some racing and off-roading, and now I think we're pretty much caught up to today and Radial Dynamics starting.
Yeah, this is I think you alluded to it, but this is one of the things I absolutely loved about the off-road industry and the products that come out of the off-road industry. It's a lot of times it's people that are super passionate about off-roading in one way or another, right? We love going out, playing with our vehicles, doing stupid things with our vehicles, getting ourselves into interesting situations. And then we're like, how can I pay for doing all these stupid things, right? and then, oh, hey, there's a problem here. This definitely does not work, and I need this to work better. And I know I can fix it. I have the skills to do it. So let's just fucking do it. And that's how a lot of the companies in the off-road industry come about. And that sounds like very synonymous with how Radial Dynamics came about, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you that this was not my first venture. I've always wanted to have my own business and work for myself and do something in the motorsports industry. And I've, over the years, started and did so many little side businesses and side projects that most of them never went anywhere.
Is it like kind of like your bubblegum welds in high school? You look back at them, you're like, oh, that was atrocious. That was terrible.
I remember, I guess probably going back 15 years ago, is thinking like, okay, I'll start a t-shirt business doing like off-road t-shirts. And so, cause I did like some graphic design and a little bit of stuff like that here and there. So I bought a single color screen press and started doing some shirts, but you sell like a couple $100, worth of shirts here and there. And it's like, gosh, how do people start businesses and make money?
Yeah.
I had for a couple of years in between I spent 12 years doing spray nozzle engineering, but I had left for 2 years in the middle and gone down to Virginia. I was working for a shop down there that was an industrial fabrication and machine shop. But on the weekends, the owner was a off-road enthusiast. And so he had a shop making like steering arms and, all of that stuff. So I was basically moonlighting doing off-road part design for them. But
that's cool.
Even that, it really only worked because he could pay his guys under the table to come in after hours and, make parts on the weekends and stuff. So, kind of looking at how does somebody really start a business and make it and be successful? When the whole idea of steering, I had that light bulb moment. It was like, okay, this is something that could work.
Nice. So tell us a little bit about Radial Dynamics. What brought you in? What was your first products that you were like, no, there's a problem here. There's an obvious problem here. I can fix it. Let me fix it. And then that became kind of the staple of where Radial Dynamics formed from.
Yeah, it was, I can tell you it was reservoirs. This whole thing exists because of steering reservoirs.
Really?
Interesting.
Yeah. So when I had that light bulb moment with Big B Motorsports and realized that, like, okay, essentially they were told that their steering pump was putting out 13 gallons per minute. And I said, I said, all right, well, how much fluid do you have in your system? And I said, I don't know, we got 3 quarts of fluid. So I pulled out my phone and opened up the calculator and I said, all right, oil leaves your pump and it goes through the whole system and it returns back into the pump in about 3 seconds. I think it was actually less than 3 seconds with the numbers that they had available at the time.
Mhm.
Sure.
Which, of course, we don't know if those numbers are accurate. That's just what they've been told by the manufacturer.
Okay.
But just based on the gallons per minute and how many gallons of oil are in the system, I said you've got like 3 seconds recirculation time. And you look at the gallons per minute and the pressure, and it's like, all right, you got 15 horsepower of oil of energy being absorbed by the oil every 3 seconds. I can help you guys. Like, I don't know what the solution is, but I know that this is wrong. So basically, I got home from that trip and I said, look, guys, if you can feed me every detail about your steering system, all of your hose sizes, how much fluid is in the system, I want to know, every detail. I ended up building a spreadsheet that I could plug in all the numbers and calculate recirculation times and oil velocity and all of this stuff that I still, I've built that spreadsheet over the years, but I still have that spreadsheet open on my computer 24/7 because every single phone call that I get from somebody saying, I'm sizing out, want to put together a system, like I'm going through that and we build it out as we go. But yeah, so I, built the spreadsheet. I said, okay, we need to change the hose sizes. We need to increase this hose diameter and we need to get more oil into the system and do this and that. And the reservoir was really one of the things that I honed in on, where the reservoir that they were using, it was one that has the spin-on filter on the bottom.
Okay.
And if you look at the way those are designed, you've got your inlet comes into the reservoir about halfway up.
Mm-hmm.
Oil will go down, flow through the filter, and then it comes back up through the center coupler on the filter and it turns and goes straight back out to the pump. So I've kind of looked at it as the oil, they've got a quart of oil sitting in the canister in the top half of that reservoir. And I said, well, if they've only got 3 quarts of oil in the system and we're dealing with such a horrendous recirculation time, even if I can just get that 1 quart of oil to circulate and be effective in the system, even though we might only be talking 4 seconds recirculation time, that's a 50% improvement right there.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, I ended up, I focused on the reservoir and came up ultimately with the Vortex reservoir design. They ran it as a prototype for a year. So, it was for a year, it was just, I had designed it. They made it because Big B has a huge manufacturing facility down in Pennsylvania. They do a lot of industrial machining and fabrication. So I didn't have to invest in the prototypes. I basically just designed it. They made it, put it on their cars, ran it for a year, and it worked. So, in 2018, I'm sitting there saying, all right, well, am I going to start a business to make these things? Am I just going to try to sell this design to, one of the other steering companies, or, what should I do with it? And ultimately decided to go into business to make reservoirs. Nice. And I did it on the side. That was 2019. I officially launched, did it nights and weekends until 2021. And then at that point, I quit my day job steering full time.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I'm always curious about, I don't know if you know this, but Tyler and I both own our own companies as well in the off-road industry. What is it about, or what is the point at which you decided to quit your day job and start your own business and go into that full time? How did you decipher that in your head? How did you know when that point hit or that happened?
The first 2 years that I was in business, I've never, from the very beginning, I've never had any question that this business was going to work out and that there would be a market demand for it. Before I even really launched the business formally, I knew that the only way this was going to fail is if I consciously let it. As far as though figuring out when to really make that jump and make that transition, I mean, I had a good job as an engineer, 40 hours a week. I didn't work overtime, had a good salary and all the benefits. And, I always figured that trying to find that point where you give up that security of the paycheck and the benefits and all that was going to be much scarier than it actually was. If it's that scary, then maybe, you should be thinking like, okay, is this the right choice? Is this the right business for me? I never had any question that was the right choice, was to give that up. But, when I was 2 years into, doing the business nights and weekends, I think it was shortly after King of the Hammers in 2021. There were some people that had some issues that hadn't heard of me before, but one that had a steering fire on their car, and I had reached out and I was just trying to get some information. I said, look, I know you're not running my products, but I'm trying to learn as much as I can about what other people are having issues with, and especially safety things like fires. I want to understand, can you feed me any information that will help me make improvements? And, at that point he said, yeah, I'm so grateful that you're reaching out like this. And I want to, when we rebuild the car, I want to put your stuff on it. And I think that was the point where I said, all right, this is time that I should really be, making some decisions. And also the business was growing at that point. It was reaching a point where it was almost working two full-time jobs, where I had, my 8 to 5 and coming home at night and doing another, 20 to 40 hours per week doing steering stuff. So, I kind of reached that point where I said, all right, you have to make a decision. You're either going to just,
sell the design or sell the product.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And, there was not much question about which choice was the right one.
Nice. I'm always curious to hear those things as, business owners. And we've had a few business questions on the podcast before, just a lot of kind of smaller stuff, but, kind of getting inside of the business mind is always kind of an intriguing thing for Tyler and I.
Yeah. No, I'm always interested to hear, people's stories about how they get into what they do and where they start.
Yeah. As we kind of, we're talking about earlier, a lot of it seems like the common theme seems to be, I found a problem that bothers me.
Yeah.
And I can solve this problem. And then a business is created around that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's even better if you found a problem that you can solve and not many other people can.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's when you get that niche in your market, your industry. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in a lot of ways, I work with, these days we're working with some really top end teams and truck builders, and, we work with some incredibly talented and smart, mechanics and designers and engineers. But in a lot of ways, even for those people that are very mechanically competent, what we do here and how we build steering pumps and just what's going on inside of a steering system is still very much black magic to a lot of people.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, there's a level of fabrication and knowledge, that people have, but then there's also a level of like fluid dynamics that is complete opposite of fabrication in a way.
Very counterintuitive in a lot of ways.
So what were some of the hurdles that you had to go through to kind of understand that?
In terms of the just the physics of steering?
Yeah.
Or in terms of building a business?
No, just the physics of steering and the fluids and how to build a good, proper steering system for some of these people that you're working with. Like
how to manipulate the black magic to do the right stuff.
It's been a lot of
witchcraft.
Yeah. There have been a lot of late nights, searching. I would say number one, manufacturer handbooks. When you look at their catalogs, they always have handbook data at the front about, how to apply their products in hydraulic systems. Like if you look at Eaton's handbook for orbital valves, there's a lot of really good information in there. And then especially when you start getting into designing all of the specific components, when it comes to selecting shaft seals and O-rings and all of the different bits and pieces that you're going to put into your products, manufacturers spend a lot of time and a lot of money doing the research to figure out, number one, the science of material compatibility and dimensional constraints that you should be applying to the products that you're putting their stuff in. And they spend a lot of time creating marketing material that has all of that information. So there's been a lot of that kind of stuff. There's, other aspects of it where, you're not necessarily going to find what you're looking for in a manufacturer handbook, but the world of academia has a lot of different studies that people have done, whether it was, their master's thesis or their doctorate. That stuff is available and online, and you can find some really good information in there that people have done, studies. Because, you look at steering pump design, we're just thinking about it, selfishly just for motorsports applications. How can I get the best performance and the best reliability and this and that? But, in the world of industrial hydraulics and automotive engineering, there are a lot of companies that have invested millions of dollars in looking at studies to improve, pump efficiency, because that has, if they're designing a car or a truck or something that's going to use hydraulics in it, every little bit of horsepower that they can save is going to save them millions or more of dollars, just in, whether it's manufacturing or operational costs and this and that make their vehicles that much more. So there's a lot of, academic studies that I've found over the years that, some of them are spot on, that give me some information that I'm looking for when it comes to designing something new. And then there's a lot of stuff that you're just not going to find anywhere on the internet or in any book, that you just have to go and test it. And
that's when you pull out your
setup
100 horsepower Ford Ranger in the garage.
Exactly. There are some things that you're just not going to find in a book, and the Ford Ranger is one of our tools that we use to try to torture test and replicate things that we don't really have any other way to do that.
I love it.
In a controlled environment.
What is the most common, I don't want to say mistake, but what's the most common thing that you see on race vehicles, recreation vehicles, that you're like, you guys don't do this with your power steering systems?
It seems like every year there's a different theme.
Okay.
Of what tends to be a common misconception, or things that people are doing wrong. And I think back to recently, and it's all over the map. I feel like it hasn't been all in one thing or another recently. But there's, whether it used to be that a lot of people might not have the correct pulley sizes, they're overspinning pumps, underspinning pumps, improper hose sizes, where you're kind of starving the pump for fluid because it can't pull enough in from the reservoir. Temperature is a big one, but it's not as big of a concern for the reasons that people think it is. We deal a lot more with temperature issues that are causing problems with thermal expansion and overfilling the reservoir than anything else. The pumps can, in general, a good quality pump can handle more temperature than most people give it credit for. But you see a lot of, concerned people that are worried about, they have to have their reservoir up a certain height above the pump. And some of those things aren't really as critical as most people think they are. But then there's other things that are more critical than people expect. Like reservoir design is, one of the critical aspects that, the cheap $50 reservoirs on Amazon are not going to give you a good flow path, and oil conditioning for the pump feed might work. You might be able to get by with a low flow rate pump, like a stock pump, but as soon as you start going up to a higher flow pump, then reservoirs, a poorly designed reservoir can definitely damage the pump. Lack of filters, lack of cooling, and hoses that get kinked and soften up at high temperatures, and then they collapse and choke off the pump.
Yep.
I mean, I've seen it all.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, you make some really amazing reservoirs. I remember, you probably don't know, you probably talked to a bunch of people on the phone, but I called Radial Dynamics one time and talked with you about reservoirs while I was looking for a new reservoir for my setup, and you were completely out of stock, and you're like, oh man, sorry, they were like 4 months backwards, and I was like, dang it, I need it like within 30 days. So I had to get a different reservoir, but I still regret it, because there's a couple of things I really like about your reservoirs. The way you have the ports set up and the internals of the reservoir creates this vortex filling and refilling of the reservoir. Explain why that's beneficial for your power steering system.
Yeah, so there's a couple things about our reservoirs that had really led to how they ended up what they are today. Number one, like I said earlier, I wanted my initial focus was to design a reservoir that gets all of the oil into circulation, so that we have just more effective oil capacity in the system rather than having all these stagnant pockets. When I was initially trying to figure out how to do a good baffle design that would allow us to recirculate all of the oil in the tank, I kind of stumbled across this old expired patent from Eaton back in 1990 for a cyclone reservoir. And it basically was a circular tank. It had, tangential inlet and outlet, kind of like ours has now. And then it just had this one donut shaped center baffle just above the inlet. So as the fluid came in and spins around, any air that's in the system gets pulled in towards the center and it just floats up to the top in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was really interested in that concept, but it still had some flaws. Number one, it was, the same thing that I was trying to solve. That design ended up with the whole top half of the tank was just stagnant. You weren't really getting any flow in and out of the top of the tank there. And then for that same reason, those reservoirs, by their design, they kind of struggle with applications where if you've got, let's say, a hydro assist set up on a steering box, you've got a single-ended cylinder. Every time you turn left and right, your fill level is going to go up and down a little bit because you've got the displacement of the rod in the cylinder.
Mm-hmm.
And so, being able to accommodate that was another challenge that the Cyclone design had. So I kind of went on a 3-week rampage of just spending every minute in my garage testing 20 or 30 different baffle designs in a clear acrylic chamber, trying to figure out how can I use this Cyclone concept to do what I want, to remove the air, bring it straight up to the top of the tank, and get that whole upper half in circulation as well, give it kind of separate upflow and downflow paths. So essentially what it does is as the oil comes in and it spins around, the heavy oil, it gets pushed out towards the walls, and then air bubbles get drawn in towards the center and they get brought up directly to the top of the tank. All of the oil that's in the top of the tank also has a chance to kind of circulate and pass back down to the bottom of the reservoir. And so it's incredibly effective especially when you're doing an initial, you initially fill your system, you've got a ton of air pockets in it. It's very effective at pulling all of that air out. And then if you're on the trail, because of the fact that you're kind of keeping the inside wall of the tank coated with oil, it does a really good job at keeping the pump fed with clean oil, even when you get at extreme angles. So if you're doing a hill climb, if, guys that have rock buggies that roll over, they might be upside down for a minute or a couple minutes, you're inevitably going to get a pocket of air into the system, but you flip it back up, you fire up the pump. It's, one of the misconceptions is don't fire your pump if there's any air in the system, because you'll instantly cook it. And yeah, you don't want to put a lot of air through your pump, but if you just fire it up and you let it sit there idling, the pump's not building any pressure, and it's
just circulating.
Just circulating. And at that point, you get that air pushed back to the tank, and the tank pulls it out, and you're on your way. So yeah, it conditions the oil. It makes sure that you've got a good feed of oil going out to the pump. What we see with some of the other reservoir designs that are out there is you can end up with some of them where if you get at a certain angle off camber on a hill climb or wherever you might be, that your outlet port to the pump ends up being no longer submerged under the oil.
Okay,
and at that point, now you're just pulling air into the pump, and so that's not great. But then other ones too, like if it's just, we see a lot of homemade tanks or, the cheap Amazon tanks or Summit Racing tanks that, if it's just a cylindrical tank and it has an inlet return bung welded onto the side, well, you have to kind of imagine what that oil's doing when it returns into that tank. It's going to shoot straight across to the opposite inside wall. And then the oil is just going to hit that wall, and it's going to kind of spread up and down, and you get a lot of turbulence, and it can either aerate the oil in there and kind of pull some of the air down into it, or just create a lot of turbulence as it's heading back out to the pump. And that's not great for the pump either.
Yeah.
Interesting. Like I've never put a lot of thought into reservoirs for your power steering system, but it all starting to really make a lot more sense about why there's an important factor there that possibly people have been missing for a long time. Because I've always thought, it holds your oil.
That's all it does.
That's what everybody
there
thinks.
To hold the extra oil, and
it's just a tank.
Yeah, it's just a tank. And if you're, if it's hot in the system, you need a bigger tank and you need to put more oil in it, and that'll solve your problems. But yeah, and totally makes sense now that you're explaining it about how important this is and how it draws the air out of your system, you know, and at first when you're talking, I'm like, I bleed my system. There's no air in the system, you know, but no, it sounds like, you know, how it's moving through your system is still collecting air. It's still kind of getting small pockets, you know, out, and whatever happens inside the reservoir could, in theory, if it's a poorly designed reservoir, could draw air back into your system.
Right. And actually, one of the other one of the little known facts that most people don't even realize is that hydraulic oil, including steering fluid, which is a hydraulic oil, will hold up to 10% by volume dissolved air.
Wow.
So if you have, you know, especially in the feed hose going from the reservoir to the pump inlet, if unless your tank is pressurized, if your tank is at 0 psi, then you are automatically in that feed hose. There's going to be some amount of vacuum because there's always going to be pressure loss as oil flows through a hose or flows through anything. And so if you reach a certain amount of vacuum in that feed hose or in certain parts of the pump, that oil or the air that's dissolved in the oil can come out of solution. And so you get these vapor bubbles, air bubbles that form out of nowhere, even though there wasn't any air in the system to begin with. And so that's, you know, another air source that people don't even realize that it exists. And, you know, there's just all of these little ways that, you know, tank pressure, the feed hose size, if the feed hose is too small for the pump, for the amount of flow rate that it's carrying to the pump, then that's going to, you know, exacerbate that situation where you get more air pulling out of solution, and then that ruins lubrication in the pump, and it, you know, it just kind of it's a snowball effect.
Yeah. Now that you're mentioning it, I have noticed, you know, I'll be out on a trail somewhere, and I'll just really quickly, we're on a break or something, I'll check my fluids, and I'll look in my power steering reservoir, and it looks kind of frothy. Is that essentially an effect of the oil holding tiny little air pockets, essentially, and that the reservoir is not doing a good job of pulling the air out of the oil as it's in there?
It could be. I mean, anytime there's frothiness and you know, foam that's inside of a tank, you have to figure out why or where it came from. And if there was maybe some air in the system to begin with, you know, most reservoir designs, that air is just going to cycle through the system over and over and over again. And you're going to build up some foam, but you're never really pulling all of the air out, because, you know, if you ever have a situation where you look in the tank and it almost looks cloudy or milky inside because of the air is broken up into such fine bubbles. It takes a couple of minutes that you have to let it sit there and let those bubbles work their way to the top of the fill level and dissipate. Well, when your pump's running, even with a well-designed system where you've got plenty of, you know, tank volume and recirculation time, at best, you're probably only looking at 5 to 10 seconds that your oil is sitting in the tank as the pump is running, as your engine's running. So if there's air in there, then just that, you know, few seconds that the oil comes into the reservoir and makes its way back down to the outlet before it goes back out to the pump, you're not giving it enough time to let that air work itself out.
Okay.
So with pretty much any other reservoir design, the only way to really bleed the system is you got to fire it up, let that air all get evenly dispersed in the oil, and then you shut it off, and whatever air is in the tank can work its way out. But then you just have to repeat that over
a bunch of times to clear it all out. Okay.
Whereas with ours, you let it run and you let it sit there and idle, and it's just doing its thing, and it's pulling that air out on its own.
Wow. So that's awesome, and that's a really beneficial thing for reservoirs that I'm amazed other people haven't figured out, and that's not a normal thing in reservoirs to have your reservoir actually do for you. So it's cool. The other thing I really like about your reservoirs is that your outlets that go for your feed line from the reservoir down to your pump, they're on the side of your reservoir, essentially. They're not coming out straight down the bottom of the reservoir. And so it makes a lot more sense for packaging in vehicles, I think, too. Is that a packaging design call, or is that part of the vortex flow?
Part of the vortex flow. So
Gotcha.
Basically, as the oil comes back into the tank from the system, comes into the return port, and it spins around, if you were to slice through the tank and you look at a cross section of the oil, if you were to actually look at like the absolute oil pressure, you're going to have higher pressure out at the wall and lower pressure at the center, just because of the centrifugal force.
I've been on that ride
exactly,
at the fair.
Exactly. and that's, I mean, it's the exact same principle. So you're pushing all of the oil out to the wall, and because you've got that force pushing it out, you've got higher pressure at the wall. So if you were to actually do the cyclone or vortex design, and you put your outlet fitting in the very bottom center of the tank, your center bottom is actually going to be at a lower absolute oil pressure than if you put it out at the wall. And so, I mean, it's, you know, there are other reservoirs that are out there on the market that do employ some kind of cyclone concept to try to do the same thing with, you know, pulling air out. But when you look at a lot of them, you know, they'll feed oil into the outside and spin it around the outside wall, but then it kind of all funnels down to a single outlet center at the bottom center, which is not great. I mean, if you ever had as a kid, if you had like the two liter bottles that you couple together and you make like the tornado in there, you can kind of end up doing the exact same thing, which actually hurts more than it helps, because now you're pulling air all the way down from, you know, you can pull air all the way down through the tank. In my old day job, we had a 50-gallon, I made a trade show spray booth where we could show off our nozzles at trade shows and stuff. It was this big 3-foot diameter acrylic tank that, you know, we kind of let the bottom just fill up with 50 gallons of water. So it was like a foot or so deep. And then we had a pump underneath and it would plumb up top to a spray nozzle. Well, if we let that, it was a single outlet in the very bottom of the tank in the center on like a 3-foot diameter. And if we got the flow conditions just right, you could actually create one of those little tornadoes that would pull all the way down, you know, a foot, and it would be a super skinny little tornado, but it would pull all the way down and pull air into the pump. And, you know, there's simple ways to break that vortex and to prevent it. But, you know, I've seen people that have made their own steering reservoirs as just a, you know, 1 foot by 1 foot square box, and they put a single outlet right at the bottom.
Dead center,
And I suspect that we've seen something very similar happen, where they've probably formed a vortex that was pulling air down into the pump and hurting more than it was helping.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's so did that concept of the vortex and the tornado pulling air into the pump, did you notice that because of the trade show, or was that something you were already very aware of and it just kind of...
No, I was already aware of it. Okay. You know, when we were getting into pump systems at that job, that was, you know, we knew that with tank designs, you had to be careful about, you know, putting in vortex breakers or making sure that, you know, your outlet was submerged however deep below the surface of the fill level. But, you know, ultimately whether or not it created a vortex had to do with the specific velocity of how fast the fluid was being pulled through that outlet port and all that. So it was tough to predict whether it would happen or not, but we at least knew that it was a thing that we'd have to watch out for.
That's cool.
So what are some other possible problems with power steering setups? Like, we did talk very briefly earlier about heat and how you were kind of actually saying the temperature of the fluid isn't as crazy as people make it out to be, because the pump can actually handle a good amount of heat through it. So why don't you clarify some of that?
Yeah. So when it comes to temperature, I mean, what I generally will tell people, especially if they're building just kind of a weekend wheeler that, you know, they're not racing and getting pumps serviced after every single weekend, I try to tell people keep it under 180 Fahrenheit. And, you know, that's going to keep everything in a reasonably safe temperature range. It's at 180. It's definitely going to be hotter than you can touch and put your hand on. So a lot of people will say, oh, my steering is getting hot, I can't touch it. Just because you can't touch it doesn't necessarily mean that it's too hot, you know, until you actually shoot it with a laser gun or put a thermometer in the tank and see what the actual oil temperature is. But, you know, we have trophy trucks and racers that are getting up well into the 200s. I actually got one that they're running a little too hot. They're getting up to about 300 Fahrenheit. But, you know, the biggest challenge with that, number one, we have to make sure they're using good fluid and a good quality pump and all of that. But the bigger challenge when we have, a 200-degree temperature swing is that the fluid is going to expand from thermal expansion.
Right. Yeah.
And you have to make sure that you have room for that expansion in the tank. If you don't, then that can lead to problems with hydrolocking the tank and causing seal issues with the shaft seal and the pump and all of that. We kind of had that this summer, midsummer, we actually had that exact issue, bit us with a couple trucks that were out testing. And until we actually looked at the data, fortunately, I love working with trophy trucks because they all have Motec. They've all got data logging on their steering temperature and their steering pressure and all of that. But we could see, we had a 200-degree temperature change. And based on how much oil they had in the system and what the size of the reservoir was, I said, well, you guys had a 2-inch increase in fill level just from thermal expansion. And we were kind of able to figure out that that it was the thermal expansion was hydrolocking the tank and blew out the shaft seal.
That's impressive. So what do you do to solve that problem? Do you add a bigger tank, or do you add a bigger cooler, or what?
Both.
Or bigger,
So it depends on the vehicle. Every vehicle is going to have different constraints when it comes to packaging. Whether they can go with we ended up this summer we made a run of reservoir extensions. So you basically take off the cap, you thread this in where the cap goes, and then the cap goes on top. So we can add, 3 or 6 inches of height to our reservoir to give it more room for thermal expansion. A better cooler, obviously a more efficient cooler. We also look at, even just between one type of pump to another might change how much heat is generated, or for rock crawlers using a load reactive versus a non-load reactive orbital will change how much the heat load in the system is. So there are a bunch of different factors that play into it. And really, there's not necessarily a one answer fits everybody.
Sure.
We have to kind of look at it on a case by case basis and see what makes the most. But, even though the pumps can handle the high temperature and most of the system components can operate up in the, well into the 200s, the lower that we can keep that peak temperature, the easier it is to kind of manage the rest of the.
Makes sense.
And it also, at that point, fluid quality, fluid selection plays a major role as well. For somebody that's just going out on the weekends, not really that hard on the system, they're not really getting over 150 Fahrenheit. I recommend a good quality fluid, but even if they were using cheap, AutoZone steering fluid, it's still not really going to be detrimental. They're not going to notice as big of a change as the team that's racing. They're running at high RPM for extended periods of time and getting up into these high temperatures, where having that really good quality synthetic fluid that's maintaining viscosity and lubrication and all of that will make or break whether the system works or not.
Whether it lives and survives. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. I've got pretty much one more question, and then I would like to dive into my system because I've been having some problems with my steering and what's going on. But before we get there, I wanted to ask you about pump speed, because there's a lot of options of throwing different pulleys on the front of your pump and making your pump spin faster or slowing it down, and how to figure out the right pulley possibly for your system, or if you should even do that and just stick with the stock one that it came with. What are your suggestions on things along those lines?
Yeah, pulley selection is one of the considerations when somebody says, I want to build a steering system for this vehicle. What pulley size should I use? Well, there's a couple different factors that play into that. Some pumps can handle high RPM better than others. So number one, knowing what pump is being used and how fast you can really afford to spin it. A lot of OEM quality stock pumps, you really don't want to go over 6,000 RPM. If you can keep them even below that, even better. But the higher the RPM, the more wear rate you're going to see, because you've got all these, metal on metal contact surfaces that there's going to be friction, and you got to maintain a lubrication layer and all of that. So number one is really just knowing, what the limits of the pump are. Number two is understanding not only what's the red line on the particular engine that you're installing the pulley on, but even more so the driver. What are their driving habits? It's one thing if you're dealing with a racer that is going to be at 7,000 RPM for hours on end, and it's, we can get away with something totally different for a West Coast rock crawler that barely cracks 3,000 RPM.
Yeah.
For the low speed rock crawlers, especially guys that are really only running where it's high traction, they're never really getting into the throttle. So you can overdrive those pumps way more with a small pulley and give them good low RPM performance. And because they're not really getting into that high RPM range, pump will be fine. And then there's also trade-offs where somebody that needs a lot of flow rate at low RPM that is also a high RPM driver, we have to kind of make a decision and say, well, here's what the pump can handle, here's what your engine speed is, and here's how much flow rate you really need across that engine, that speed range.
Mm-hmm.
So you can either make the choice where we either deal with, number one, using a much more expensive pump that we can run slower speed, get more flow rate out of it, or we use a less expensive pump that you either just
Dumb
deal
down the
with
pulley or slow down the RPMs artificially, I guess.
Either deal with a lower flow rate at low RPM where you're going to feel some performance drawbacks, or you kind of overdrive it to get the low RPM flow rate that you need, and you just realize that this pump isn't going to last forever because you're going to shorten its life at high RPM. And there's some people that say, well, yeah, it's fine if I get a couple months or a year out of this pump. That's fine. Let's just send it. Most people say, all right, I'll do the correct pulley size, and if it has any kind of trade-offs at low RPM, we'll do it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Just rev the engine a little bit more
Yeah.
to make that corner.
Right. But and one of the other things, so it's not so much just what the maximum engine speed is, but it's really what we pay closer attention to is the range of engine speed. So it's one thing if somebody has an engine that goes up to 8,000 RPM, that fact in and of itself is not overly concerning because we can underdrive the pulley or on our TC pumps, we can send those up to 8,000 RPM all day long. So we'll just run it 1-to-1. The challenge is if it's redlining at 8,000, but they idle at 800, you've got a 10-to-1 turn down range. So it's going to be really difficult to give them good flow rate at idle when we have to manage that top end. But if they idle at 2,000 RPM or even 1,500 RPM, then you're only dealing with a 4-to-1 or 5-to-1 turn down ratio. So we can kind of keep the pump in a much happier range at that point. So I always look at high idle as a great way, when that option exists. And of course that depends on, your engine management and stall speed on your converter and all that. But when the option exists for a high idle, it's a great way to, number one, boost your steering flow rate. And number two, you also get other benefits with, higher flow rate in your water pump for cooling and your alternator charging and all of that. It's really just reducing that minimum to maximum range.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's something I wouldn't have thought about.
Yeah, absolutely. When you were talking there, we were talking about keeping the power steering pump lubricated through the fluid, the power steering fluid. I kind of never put those two together. I always assumed that the power steering fluid was in the system to move the components and help move the pump and everything. So
steering fluid, it's wearing many hats. It's transferring energy, horsepower from the pump to your steering box or your rack and pinion or whatever, your hydraulic cylinder. But it's also lubricating the pump components. It's keeping everything cool, and you kind of, the shaft seal on the pump is reliant on a fresh supply of oil to keep that heat from the seal lip away. And it's wearing many different hats in the steering system.
Yeah. It makes me, think about I should be probably changing my power steering fluid occasionally, and it's not a one-trick pony anymore. Yeah,
right.
But so if you're raising the speed of your pump, do you have to play with the viscosity of the power steering fluid to help keep it lubricated?
Not that you need to necessarily play with the viscosity because you're not really going to be modifying it at all. It's really just more a matter of what fluid you're using, but certainly for applications where people are going to be running at higher RPM, that is where we're going to see a lot more, the fluid selection becomes a lot more critical because certain fluids are going to change their viscosity more relative to temperature than others. Synthetics generally will stay at a much more constant viscosity as temperature changes. And so that's, the best fluid that I can recommend is Maxima Synthetic. That's what we stock exclusively. It's the only fluid we sell. It's actually very reasonably priced relative to a lot of the other, like the high quality synthetics and conventional fluids. But we have, these trophy trucks that run well into the 200-degree Fahrenheit range. And then, someone else that's running in a cold, northern winter climate that we don't really have any problems. Some of the other conventional steering fluids that are out there, if they have higher viscosity, especially when it gets cold, we've had some customers that, running conventional fluids at 20 or 30 degrees Fahrenheit, the pump is whining until the system gets warmed up because the viscosity is just too high and the oil doesn't really want to move yet.
Yeah. It shouldn't run honey in your power steering system. I get it.
Try not to.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else on your end before I start moving this to the Jimmy podcast?
The only thing that comes to mind is I think a common argument in the off-road world of your power steering coolers. Do you run the zigzag ones or do you run a straight through power steering cooler?
Well, we make one that's a straight through finned tube cooler.
Mm-hmm.
There are much less expensive ones that are out there that are similar, either straight through or it's a double pass finned tube cooler that, there are different fin designs. So the inexpensive ones have lengthwise fins because they're just made out of a piece of extruded aluminum. You chop it up to length and then you weld your bung ends on the end and it's good to go. And you can find those for like 60 or $70 from pretty much every place online has something like that. We make ours with a different design. It's a fin shape where it's a circular fin shape that we actually turn the fins into a block of billet. Because if you look at the lengthwise fins, picture like a truck tailgate. The whole reason that a truck is more efficient, fuel efficient with the tailgate up is because it creates that stagnant pocket.
Yeah.
And you kind of do the same thing with the lengthwise fins on one of the extruded. You kind of create like a series of truck beds. And most of your airflow ends up just going around the cooler entirely.
Okay.
So with ours, if you're looking front, head on at the cooler, you can basically see, straight through the cooler, through the fins. And so you get a lot more air contact that way. But it's still not going to be the most efficient cooler, but it's one that's compact. It's easy to toss anywhere. You don't have to worry about throwing rocks or pushing branches through it because it's stout.
Mm-hmm.
A cooler like a CBR or PWR cooler, something that's more like a radiator style with fans on it, definitely is going to give you a lot more heat dissipation, but they're going to be generally a little bit more fragile. Some people don't want to have to wire up an extra fan, or they want something that's more passive. And so in a lot of applications, the inline cooler, even though it might not be the highest efficiency cooler, it provides enough cooling dissipation for the application, for the pump that's being used, or for what somebody is doing with their particular vehicle.
Is there any concerns of flow restrictions with?
That's always a concern.
With, like the radiator style ones.
Yeah. So when anybody's going with one of those style coolers, it's important to look at what that cooler is really rated to handle for flow rate, and that information is not always easy to find from many of the cooler manufacturers. But I have seen them, more so an issue on the non-regulated pumps. So for somebody that's running like either one of the race pumps or like an industrial gear pump for steering, those pumps don't have any flow control in them. So your flow rate's going to theoretically keep going up with your engine speed. Realistically, they're going to hit some limit at some certain point where they just physically can't pull any more oil in. But if the maximum flow rate that they get up to is creating significant back pressure through that cooler, I have seen coolers that actually, like, the side tank would just blow right off before, and it has happened.
Wow.
So yeah, it's certainly something that you have to pay attention to when you are selecting your cooler, and it's, everything about the steering system has to be matched up with everything else. Otherwise, there are going to be inefficiencies or performance problems or reliability problems like that can lead to issues.
Okay, cool. That's good to know.
Yeah, absolutely. All right.
So what's going on with your stuff, Jimmy?
Yeah. So just so the listeners have an understanding of what's kind of going on or what we've been doing for the most part, I called Eric, Radial Dynamics, to originally figure out what I should do with Bobcat. That's my 91 Toyota pickup. I'm having an issue where I have to hit high RPMs to turn. The steering is more or less locking up on me when I'm just driving down the road, and to make like any sort of like a right hand or left hand turn from a stop sign, I have to give it RPMs just to get it up to be able to push stuff through, I guess, to be able to move the pump, move my hydraulic ram setup. The setup on Bobcat is more or less 100% stock with a ported tapped box, power steering box that goes down to a single end ram, hydraulic ram. Eric and I spoke on the phone. I kind of laid this all out to him. I pretty much said that exact scenario. And I said, before you give me your answer, you want to join us on the podcast and you can tell me live what needs to be done. We can kind of go through this diagnostic side of things on the podcast, and then I will move forward with the project and do it, and then we can have Eric back on and we can kind of conclude Bobcat's saga of power steering. So with all that said, Eric, tell me what I need to do.
Yeah, so you said that you've had this system for a long time, for years, and it has worked fine in the past, and it's only just recently starting to fade out on you and require higher RPM. So essentially the fact that when you give it gas that you get that steering power back tells me that more than likely, with fairly high confidence, what's happening is that the pump is getting worn out internally.
Okay.
We've been talking about lubrication and all of these things going on inside of the pumps, and especially kind of the stress that they see at high RPM. Well, when we look at how a pump functions and what's going on inside of there's all of these stationary and rotating metal components that there's no seals in between them. The only thing that's trapping oil in these cavities and actually pushing it through the system and building all of this pressure is that all of these metal components have very tight clearances that are held to ridiculously tight tolerances. A lot of these are going to be, clearances that are less than 1,000th of an inch between them. And you're spinning these things at 7,000, 8,000 RPM. So what happens is over time, those clearances start to open up, and now you get leakage internally within the pump. So your pump probably has 10 vein cavities inside of it that are, growing and shrinking in volume constantly. That's what's pushing oil through your system. So as the clearances start to grow, and this could happen from between a few different components within the pump, but as those clearances grow and the internal leakage rates increase, essentially you might be losing 1 or 2 gallons per minute. That's all just leaking from one vein cavity to the next one behind it. And it's not until you increase the RPM that, because the pumps are moving flow rate relative to RPM, it's not until you start to raise your RPM that you kind of overcome those losses and now you get your steering back.
Right. Okay. So what you're more or less telling me is that I'm having internal leakage inside the pump, and it's just not creating the pressure that it used to be able to push, because once it tries to push, it can leak out in other directions and go other places in there. Right. So it's not able to build that pressure up that I need to steer.
And it might still build that pressure at higher RPM, but at low RPM, as pumps start to wear, as they lose their mechanical efficiency, where you're going to feel that the most is at low RPM, high pressure applications. So sitting at that stop sign, when you're rolling down the road, you don't need as much pressure to turn the wheels. It's the same thing as if you have manual steering. If you've ever driven a car with manual steering, you don't turn it when you're stationary, but when you're moving, it's not so bad. So it's the same kind of thing as, when you're stopped at a stop sign and trying to turn the wheel to get ready to make a turn, that's where you're going to feel it.
Sure. Okay. And so I need a power steering pump,
a new pump.
So should I just get a stock one because it's been working that way for so long, or am I really doing damage to the entire system by having this entire stock setup, and I should actually think about adding things like a vortex reservoir or a cooler in line, or what? Like, what would be a good setup for my occasional rock crawler that I almost never drive on the road?
Right. So, I mean, just having run the stock setup, I mean, you're not necessarily damaging anything. You are maybe putting a little bit more stress, especially when you're rock crawling and going off road. There is more stress on the pump and on the stock components. Whether or not, you want to invest in upgrading to a better quality pump, better reservoir, all this stuff, then that's, usually comes up to each individual person and what they're trying to get out of their vehicle. If you were to replace it with just a stock pump, it's going with like a reman pump from the auto parts store can very much be hit or miss.
Yeah.
I never recommend a reman pump, just because the remanufacturers that are rebuilding pumps for the parts stores, they're basically just collecting cores from every place, and they're taking out all the bits and pieces and whatever they can slap together that moves fluid. They're going to put it in a box and send it out. So you never really know what you're actually going to end up with in those. I've seen, like, you could end up with a different displacement pump. It could be a little bit different flow rate. It could be a little bit different pressure, and there's really no control or, quality mechanisms other than the fact that they tested it and it pumped oil. That was about the extent of it.
Perfect. Yeah.
So at the very least, you would want to replace it with a brand new pump. And, a factory pump, if it's been working fine, sure, you could probably get away with it, and more than likely would have the same performance that you've had for years. And maybe you can get, more years out of it before something else happens.
Mm-hmm.
If your oil has a lot of glitter in it at this point, then there's probably a good chance that there may be contamination in the steering box or in the ram, and that's going to be difficult to actually clean out. And that presents opportunity where you could put a brand new pump in it, and then something that was left over in the system either damages the box or damages the pump. We've seen that happen before as well. So definitely, at the very least, you'd want to really try to take the system apart, at least take all the hoses apart, drain everything out, try to flush stuff out with oil if you can. But as far as, making upgrades, certainly going to an aftermarket pump. I mean, one of our TC pumps will generally bolt in place of a Toyota pump, and then you'd have to set it up with a remote reservoir. But we can get, higher pressure, so you're going to generate a little bit more force in your steering system. If you've ever run into issues where you try to yank on the wheel really quick and you feel like it locks up a little bit, or like it only lets you turn so fast, then we can kind of overcome that with a little bit more flow. And with steering boxes, you're going to reach a certain point where giving it more pump flow won't give you any additional benefit, because you're kind of maxing out the flow rate through the box. But we can, for the first couple steps, we can overcome that with better pump. So yeah, definitely the best thing that I would be able to recommend would be like one of our Pro Series TC pumps with the 3.5-inch vortex reservoir, and putting a return filter if you don't have a filter in the system already.
Does a stock one have a filter in it? I don't think so. Yeah, no, I definitely have always felt like let me start here. When I added the hydraulic assist, thank you, to the system, I did feel that it improved my steering and off-road handling while I'm off-roading. Mm-hmm. I never felt that it was as good as everybody says it is. Everybody's like, it was amazing. I have had all, like I could turn it with my pinky, all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Like it was better. Like it wasn't that grandiose, And so I do feel that I was at the point at when I did all this, it was like this new like technology. Like I had this RAM, or at least that's how I felt it was. There was a new kit out from Trail Gear, and I bought it, and I was like, this is fantastic. But I never felt that it was as good as people always said it should be. And I think that I was limited by the stock setup that I never grew upon. So I do think there is definitely an advantage to, upgrading the pump and getting a vortex reservoir in there. Do I need a cooler as well?
Do you not have a cooler in the system right now?
I don't have anything in there. I have like maybe that hose that goes out in front of one of the radiators or something that comes back.
Yeah, so it's the cooler. I obviously recommend having a cooler in there. Ultimately, it depends on how much you're really pushing your steering system and how much heat you're building up. We've got competition front and rear steer rock crawlers that do We Rock and X Rock and stuff that don't run any coolers because they're generally low RPM. They've got plenty of fluid in the system and they're not really putting that much heat to their setup. But that doesn't mean that everybody can get away with no cooler. So at the end of the day, it's tough to say just based on a particular vehicle whether a cooler is necessary, but it never hurts to have. It's very unlikely that you're going to have so much cooling capacity that you're going to run too cold. And there is such a thing as, if your steering fluid's not getting up to 100 Fahrenheit, then you should really be, using a much lower viscosity oil because there's kind of a certain viscosity range that we want to see the fluid be maintain lubrication and all of those things that, we're planning on steering systems are going to be in generally like that 130 to 180 Fahrenheit range.
Okay.
Yeah. So in a way, it sounds like a cooler could be a next step for me for my system.
Right.
I could get a new pump, which it sounds like I need regardless whether it's a beautiful designed one by Radial Dynamics or something at factory off the shelf, and a remote reservoir, because I feel like I do need more capacity because I still have the really small tank that was on the stock ones. And I know even the old school pirate days, where like I built these bigger tanks, I needed this, more fluid. And I'll tell you, I have overflowed my tank. I don't know whether it was heat and the expansion or just moving it with my pump at a weird angle. I've had fluid come out of the top of my tank.
And you've got a single-ended ram, so you've got that fill level change just from turning left to right. So probably a combination of all three, to be honest. But so I mean, I think that especially if with that hydro assist setup, number one, the thing that I usually hear when people add on a hydro assist cylinder is that it all of a sudden feels like the steering's a little bit laggy, and that usually comes from just when you add on that cylinder, there's that much more oil that you need just to turn the same number of degrees of steering. You have to have that much more oil pushing everything left to right. So running out of flow rate is number one, but number two, especially if you're really starting to push the system, just having a little bit more pressure. The stock pump is, I don't really know what the specs are on hand for the Toyota pump, but probably somewhere in the 13 or 1400 PSI range, maybe 1500. So by adding a couple extra 100 PSI, we can definitely increase the amount of turning force, and that reduces essentially your effort at the steering wheel.
Okay. Yeah, great. So I think, I think a good starting spot for me might be a new pump and the reservoir, and then I can check and see how hot my fluid is getting while I'm out on the trail, and I can then that should tell me if I'm going to need that cooler or not.
Right. And a filter. I'll add that in.
Okay.
Every steering system needs a filter.
Okay.
Yeah. Filter. I'm writing it all down right now too.
That's one of those things that not every vehicle, I would say at this point most people have filters in their steering systems, but not everybody does. And as we're talking about these clearances, tight clearances inside of the pump and in the valving in the steering box too, we have less than 1,000th of an inch in between all these moving metal surfaces. If you start to have your pump wear out and now you're sending glitter through your system, well, that glitter is going to start to wear out the pump faster. Yep. And then the whole thing, your rate of wear is an exponential curve where it just keeps getting worse and worse because the more contamination that you get, the faster the wear happens.
Absolutely. It's an abrasive material now running through your sensitive system. Yep. So, all right. I think I've got a good laundry list, and maybe off air we'll talk credit cards. But no, I appreciate the help and suggestion there. And then, I think a fun follow-up call, we can talk about the outcome of my system and everything. And then maybe we can dive more into some scientific stuff of just power steering systems or whatever. And we can get into some of the nitty gritty science behind some of that stuff.
Sounds good.
Cool. Yeah, I'd got nothing else. I do realize I think I want to redo my cooler. I need a filter. And I want one of your reservoirs too. So I think I'm going to go down that list too. But this has been awesome to have you on, man, and get to pick your brain about power steering systems, learn about your Toyotas and your racing career. And it's just been fun to meet the people behind these companies in the off-road industry that are doing some cool stuff out there. So thanks for taking more time than we were expecting to be on here today. Anything else for the listeners out there? Any new products you want to tease or big sales you have for end of year stuff or coming up? You're going to be out at King of Hammers. What's going on?
I will be out at Hammers. I go out pretty much every year. So yeah, definitely. I'll be floating around. I don't really have a booth or anything, but if there's anything that I can do to help people with their steering systems, radial-dynamics.com. We're on at Radial Dynamics on Facebook and Instagram. Our shop phone number is 413-776-5281. And if you call it, you get me. You can also text it. You'll get me.
Nice.
And so, yeah, I'm always happy to help people out. I appreciate you guys having me on here today. It's been a lot of fun. And yeah, not really any new products at the moment. We've been kind of hyper focused on dialing in pumps this year and doing all that, but we've got some new valves and stuff that we're working on prototypes for some of the high end trophy truck market. And
Cool.
Yeah, excited about where the next year is going to lead as we're focused on just continuing to grow the business. This year I got my first full-time employee, and
That's
Congrats.
and thank you. And then we've got a co-op student from the local tech school as well. So we're going to be picking up another co-op student for the spring semester. And I'm sure we're going to be needing more help here pretty soon because things are growing quick.
That's awesome. That's always good to hear.
Yeah.
Well, awesome, man. Thanks again for taking the time. This is kind of the fun part for me where I get to put everybody on the spot. So we'll do Jimmy first. He's used to it. But final words to kind of close up the episode. Anything you want to leave people with? It could just be like, man, I'm looking forward to my spaghetti tonight for dinner, or watch your PSI and flow rates every, I don't know, whatever it is. Jimmy, final words to wrap this up.
Well, first, I actually am having spaghetti for dinner.
There you go.
Thank you for mentioning that. It's on the list of things that I need to do today. But I'm just shocked about how much the power steering fluid actually does. I never really put that through my head. Like, I really did think it was just a push-pull system, and that was really it. And I appreciate Eric just like kind of bringing the awareness to the podcast about how much the science actually goes into the power steering system. So that was really cool.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Eric, final words to leave everybody with today?
Well, I just want to, everybody that has listened to this podcast today or any of the other ones that I've been on, send out my appreciation for our customers and our supporters and everybody that's told one of their friends, you need to call Radial Dynamics to help you with their steering, because that's most of the phone calls that I get start with, my buddy told me I should call you. Yep. And I think it was no different here. So yeah, I appreciate that. It's been a pretty wild journey, and I get to live the dream. Absolutely, 100% living the dream that I've always wanted to do, playing with race cars for a living, and coming to my shop every morning and building steering parts for ridiculous vehicles. So
that's fun. Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, thanks again, Eric, and we'll just leave it there. So everybody out there, remember, as always, keep crawling.
You're going to like this one.
Oh, okay. I'm
Yeah.
excited.
What does a bad carpenter make?
I don't know.
Loose stools. I told you you'd like it.
That's pretty good. That one's a good one. Yes, that one's right up my alley.
Look.
Not my
We're more than halfway through the blues.
What?